for what promises to be a memorable evening. The reading order will be as follows. Patricia will read first, followed by Elizabeth, then Suzanne, and finally, Michael will close this portion of the evening. After all four authors have read, we will conduct a Q&A session with them and invite you to put any questions forward to them. We hope you will stay for that as well. Okay, so let's begin. We ask that you please mute your audio during the readings and refrain from posting in the chat as well. Thanks. Patricia Ann McNair's recently released short story collection, Responsible Adults, was selected as a Legacy Series book by Cornerstone Press, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Her essay collection, And These Are the Good Times, was named a finalist for the Montaigne Medal for Most Thought-Provoking Book of 2017. The Temple of Air, McNair's debut story collection, received the Chicago Writers Association Book of the Year Award, Southern Illinois University's Devil's Kitchen Reading Award, and the Society of Midland Authors, US, Finalist Award. McNair has lived 98% of her life in the Midwest. She's managed a gas station, served as a medical volunteer in Honduras, sold pots and pans door to door, tended bar and breaded mushrooms, worked on the trading floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and taught aerobics. Today, she is an assistant professor in the English and Creative Writing Department of Columbia College, Chicago. She lives in Chicago with her husband, the visual artist, Philip Hartigan. Please welcome Patricia Ann McNair.
Thank you, Ignatius. Thank you so much. And thanks to Natalia as well, and to all of the predecessors of Sunday Salon. It's one of my favorite series. I was just saying how much I miss being able to sit there in the Reveler or wherever it would be held and have French fries with folks and drink beers and chat in between the readings. So I'm going to be reading tonight from my new collection, Responsible Adults, and I thought I would read the title story. It's just one of the shorter ones in the collection. Toby said everything would be fine. He said it. They'd been gone days then, gone a whole box of Cheerios, gone a gallon of juice, gone maybe a week. Time was something stretchy to me, long and short, short and long. I was 9 then. We couldn't drive, not him, not me. We usually sat in the back seat, slept there. But when we got up that morning, that first one, the front seat where they always were was empty. Shotgun, he called. Toby, my brother, like George always did when Ma used to drive back before. When we used to go, when our tires weren't flat, when we had gas, when going was still fun. Right, babies? Ma used to say over her shoulder to us when we drove to the river, when we parked near the playground. This is fun, right, babies? Leaving school, that flea bag, that's what Ma called it, apartment, where she and George shared a bed, and we got rugs in the floor, blankets. Where'd the car come from? I can't remember now. It was just there one day, outside the apartment, Ma behind the wheel, engine going, smoke out its tailpipe. Shotgun, George called and climbed into the front seat beside Ma. And me and Toby crawled into the back seat on our knees over the spring parts, metal bits sticking up from the cushion. At night, when we pulled off the highway and into the trees or out into the corn, I couldn't sleep sometimes. And I would stick my fingers in the holes where the springs were. I would dig the stuffing out and roll it in my fingers, make little balls like I used to at the kitchen table with ripped apart white bread that went gray from my hands. You wash your hands, Tiff? Ma would say then, mean, grab my wrists, hard. Yes'm. A lie. I didn't used to like to wash my hands, didn't like to watch the water dirty with my skin cells. I remember that from Ms. Garcia's class from when we went to school, and with whatever was left of what I'd been holding circle and sink down the drain. Like losing something, I used to think. We never had much. I didn't like to lose things. Now, ever since we got found, I wash my hands all the time. My knuckles bleed, my palms are raw. It's gonna be fine. That's Toby for you, the optimist. Ma called him that. George called him little shit. Sometimes it was good, that name, bad words, but good in them. Like when he, George, first moved in with us, in with Ma, and he would ask Toby to walk on his back. Or when he handed him a juice box. Come here, little shit, and here you go, little shit. Those days, the early ones, Ma would look at George with some kind of soft in her eyes, and she would run her hands down his face, tuck her head into his chest like she was breathing him in. Pretty quick though, when George yelled little shit, it came out mean, mad, hard. It got to be more bad than good. Who, I heard one night in the woods in the car in the back seat, an owl, I thought before I opened my eyes, because the sound made me imagine something, made me remember. And I remembered too from when I was at school, Ms. Garcia would tell us to close our eyes when we wanted to remember something, when we wanted to imagine. Close our eyes when we wanted to see. I didn't understand that at first, and mostly I just saw colors when I squeezed my eyes shut, but sometimes I could see other things. Ma smiling at the kitchen table, coffee cup in front of her, just the three of us there. Toby teaching me how to rub the dirt off the bottom of my feet with my socks before I put them on. A bedroom I imagined was mine, but never was, pink and white and frilly curtains. Who? My eyes tight, and there's purple, there's red. And I could see that toy Ma gave me before she took it away. Animals and sounds, who, meow, moo, owl, cat, cow, owl, cat, cow, owl, cat, cow. And George sitting on the porch with a beer and an ashtray yelled like the lion in the toy roared, and Ma grabbed the toy from me and smashed it on the front steps, and one of the broken pieces hit me in the face and made me bleed a little. I opened my eyes in the back seat because I didn't want to see that. And the who became who. It wasn't an owl, it was Ma. Who will take care of them, she's whispering. I can hear though, even from the back seat, even with Toby breathing loud in his sleep next to me. I can hear and I can see now with my eyes open the rips in the ceiling of the car and the trees out the windows and the shadows and the dark. Mama, I say quiet, because I'm afraid of the dark and sometimes afraid of her too. Mama? I say that when I'm happy and when I'm scared, both. And I sit up and lean over the front seat and I can see them tangled up, legs and arms and hair and faces. Who's who, I think. Shh, honey, shh, baby. Ma unwinds and sits up, and next to me is Toby, and he's awake now too. And Ma puts her face close to mine, close enough to kiss, and Toby puts his arm around me, and this is good, I think, the way we're all so close, we three. This is how it should be. How I want it to be always. And George jerks his shoulders and sits up quick, elbows popping and his face set hard. I can see his eyes shining at me in the dark. It's okay, Tiff, Ma says. She puts her hand on my cheek and her palm is rough and I want it to feel good when she touches me, but really it doesn't. It's scratchy, her hand, and it smells like burnt things. Go to sleep, baby, she says. I nod and Toby pulls me down to the seat and holds me close, his arms around me. I lie there with my eyes open, staring at the place where a light used to be in the ceiling, staring at the way the wires twist and turn, the way they hang down. I can hear what sounds like trucks on the road, but I don't know where the road is. So I close my eyes, purple, red, and listen harder until I can't hear much of anything. They'll be better off. It sounds like George, but maybe it's nothing, and maybe I'm asleep because I hear an owl too, so maybe it's a dream, Or maybe it's a memory. Who? They found us, the farmer first, whose woods we were parked in, out walking in the early morning and surprised to see me and Toby. Jesus, he said, when he looked into the car windows and saw us wrapped together in the back seat. He pulled a phone from his pocket, spoke quiet into it. Alone, I heard. No responsible adults. Then the cops came, a man and a woman. Tiffany, I said when they asked. They brought blankets, and I was happy about that. We were in our shorts, all we had, and our summertime t-shirts. But it was cold now. Our breath made frozen spider webs on the windows inside the car. I'd scratched my name in the fog, in the ice. T-I-F-F. Little shit, Toby answered, like maybe he'd forgot he was Toby, like maybe he never really had been. I saw the policeman smile when Toby said that. Then I saw him frown. Come on, he said, and they brought us from our car to theirs. I put my blanket over Toby's shoulders. I put my arms around him. I hugged him close and he hugged me back like we did those nights and days after they left. Ma, George, those days after they were gone. They were talking in the radio up there. The woman police was at the wheel. The man was shotgun. We could see the backs of their heads and the woods outside the window. It was day, but there was dark out the windows, shadows, and black places. The woman police turned up the heat. I felt the warm on my face, like Toby's breath at night, only more, and it smelled dry and like metal, not like Toby, moist, animal. The sun shined some through the trees, and I put my head under the blanket, squeezed my eyes closed until I saw the colors behind my eyelids, red, purple, imagining, but nothing came. Everything will be fine, I heard someone say. Maybe I believed it, red, purple, and maybe I didn't. Thank you.
Patty, that was so moving and so beautiful. Thank you so much. I was just so absorbed. Poor kids. So it's my great pleasure to now introduce Elizabeth McKenzie, who's coming to us from, I'm going to get it right, Santa Cruz, California, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Elizabeth McKenzie's novel, The Portable Veblen, was longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction and received the California Book Award for Fiction. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Tin House, Best American Non-Required Reading, and others. McKenzie is the managing editor of Catamaran and senior editor of the Chicago Quarterly Review. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight, and it's all yours. Go for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Ignatius. Thank you for inviting me. And I just want to say that I'm a huge admirer of Natalia's writing, and we had a lot of fun working together in the Chicago Quarterly Review in the past. So I miss that. I'm just going to read a chapter from a novel I'm working on now. And I don't think it needs any introduction. It's just it's an episode from the main character's past. So my doctor was saying, leaning over the desk on his elbows, I'm ready anytime you are. Please, start from the beginning. Well, I'm not sure where the beginning is, I said at that time, very literal-minded. All right, then, he said, why don't you start with the problem? Dr. Fountain Goose had black, oily hair, severely parted on the side and combed flat, a pale face and chapped lips. He wore a white lab coat as always. I'd been having checkups with him most of my life. He'd tap my knees with his little rubber hammer. He'd look down my throat with a popsicle stick. He'd stick a plastic cone in my ears. He'd placed a cold disc on my chest and listen. He'd confirmed I'd had mumps and chicken pox, but as far as I could remember, I'd never really talked to him. He was right. There was a problem, but there was more than one problem, so I struggled to zero in. He cleared his throat and said, "This is what I know. Your mother tells me you have trouble when you visit your father, and that you come home very unhappy, even unable to speak. She wants to see if I can be of any help. Do you think I can be of any help?" It was all trouble, but at the same time, I had no understanding of any of it. "Penny, I'm a GP. Help me out here. How old are you?" "I'm 10, I said. That much I knew. Though I was the kind of 10 that missed being 9. I liked every year of my life so far. I didn't like things to change. "Just starting 4th grade? I nodded. "Happy at school?" "I like school." "Good. Do you have trouble making friends?" "No," I said. "I have friends." "Very good. And how are your grades?" "Pretty good. I get A's and B's." "Okay. And your home life here, are you happy with that?" I nodded. "No comment?" "I'm happy," I said. "Everything's fine." "Your stepfather, do you get along?" I nodded. "Yeah, very much." Then as an afterthought, I said, "But I really, really, really hate the word stepfather." "You hate it? Why is that?" I didn't know then how to explain how lonely and desolate that word made me feel whenever it was used to introduce him, but I could tell Dr. Fountain Goose was taking it the opposite of how I meant it. So I said, "Because I love him so much, and that word makes it sound like he's fake." "You'd rather just call him your father." "Sure, like my sister does. Also, I feel bad when people find out I have a different last name." My voice trailed off since there was no reason to mention this, but I'd never really had a chance to complain about stuff like this before or even put it into words. "Why is that?" "I guess because maybe it makes me feel like I'm tagging along, not really part of the family." Just saying it made my throat catch. "But you very clearly are part of the family, are you not?" "Yeah, I know it shouldn't bother me." Dr. Fountain Goose looked satisfied, as if he'd finally achieved something. "All right, so what was going on in San Diego?" I took a few deep breaths like I was preparing to leap over a trench. "Okay, it's when I go to San Diego to see my father, well, it's not a good situation." "Why not?" He leaned in further over his desk. "It's not good because it seems like he's not happy I'm there," I finally managed. "What makes you think he's not happy you're there?" Was it possible he didn't believe me? Maybe he thought I was spoiled and expected too much. "I guess because he seems mad right from the beginning. He seems mad when he comes to the airport to get me. He makes fun of my clothes. 'Slip out of that straitjacket, kid. Where'd your mother think you were going? A job interview?' That's what he said." "My goodness, what kind of clothes are you wearing when you arrive?" Well, this year I was wearing a matching skirt and jacket. It's sort of blue corduroy. He made me change in the back seat of his car before we even left the parking lot. And while I was changing, he kept making fun of me for ducking down and thinking people were looking." He said. "Well, then he started asking me a few questions about my year since I last saw him. But when I answered, he started imitating me in this high, squeaky, horrible voice. Like he thinks the way I talk sounds stupid, or what I'm saying sounds stupid. It's hard to tell." "Would you be able to remember any examples?" "Sure. I told him my teacher liked a poem I wrote and that I won a prize, a book of poems by Ogden Nash. So in this horrible high voice, he said, 'Oh, I'm a poetry genius. I won a prize. I won a prize.' My rendition was so repulsive, Dr. Fountain Goose grimaced. "Okay, then what did you say?" I didn't know what to say. I was confused. I was trying to figure out what was going on. "Is that the main thing, that he makes fun of what you say?" "Oh, no, that's not the main thing at all. It's just one thing. Then there's how I walk. As soon as he sees me at the airport, he imitates me and keeps nagging at me to stop walking like a duck. He even quacks at me." "Right there in the airport?" "Yeah, he said I looked like a duck in a straitjacket." "Is it possible he's just trying to be funny?" Just talking about it, I could feel pressure building in my chest and stomach. No wonder I never thought about San Diego as soon as I got home. Describe your father, said Dr. Fountain Goose. What he looks like? Yes, please. I could see him as I did at the airport and back against the wall. He wasn't the type to stand in front like class president. He wore thready, cut-off jeans and a red Hawaiian shirt popping with long stamen hibiscus. Was about 5'10", 200 pounds, bald. His heavy arms were crossed, but the forearm with a jade-colored scar was in full view. His badge of indecision, the remnant of an anchor, his former tattoo. Big nostrils packed with hair that looked like straw. A few gold teeth, light blue eyes like ice. He could add a stack of numbers in seconds and had the face of a boxer to back it up. He smoked a pack of Camels a day and drank a bottle of red wine a night. He could cut to the chase and see the flaw in anything, especially me. I'm getting the sense, Penny, that your father makes you unduly nervous. Would that be a fair assessment? Very fair, I said. I was sweating all over. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about your visits there? Okay. If I'm reading, he'll call me a bookworm and tell me to go outside and play. This summer he even grabbed my book and ripped it up. Literally ripped it up? Yes, it was Call of the Wild. It was brand new. He tore it in half down the spine and then started shredding the pages. I started crying, and then he started imitating me crying, rubbing his eyes and going, boo-hoo, boo-hoo-hoo. So then I went outside to play, and later he got mad I was talking to this kid down the street who happens to be a little younger than me, even though he's nice and fun. He says only chumps play with younger kids. Do you have any idea why he might think that? Maybe if I was playing with a toddler, it would be weird, but Winchell's only like 6 months younger than me. I see, Dr. Fountain Goose said. There's a lot to unpack here. Where does your father work? He asked. He sells insurance to Marines, and he has a used car lot and a vacuum shop. Sometimes he takes me with him, but mostly not. He has a friend who works at the San Diego Zoo, and whenever they're doing an animal autopsy, we have to go over there. That could be interesting, I imagine. This summer they were dissecting a walrus. There was a lot of blubber and guts and stuff. Maybe your father hopes you'll become a doctor. I don't think so. He just wants to get the meat, I said bitterly. My doctor frowned. What meat? The walrus meat. He calls it meat for the mutt. He gives it to a lady a few houses away who has a giant schnauzer. He gives it to a lady who has a giant schnauzer, my doctor said, writing for a while on his pad. For the first time, he looked concerned. What exactly is the home situation at your father's? You mean like who lives there? Yeah, the neighborhood, that sort of thing. I took another deep breath and described Mission Beach, the narrow spit between the beach and the bay, crowded with huts and cottages and makeshift summer places, no yards, no grass because the waterfront was all around. People ate on their front steps on the bricks between the narrow courts that had divided the row of houses in place of streets, damp and sandy towels tossed over fences, swimsuits like flags on the clothesline, everyone sunburned, feral, barefoot, empty wine bottles on the picnic table, how the bikers lived over the garage. Bikers over the garage, can you elaborate on that? Well, there's an apartment there, and these guys who are in a motorcycle gang called the Pallbearers rent it, and I think there's 3 of them, but lots of their friends hang out and work on my motorcycles all day and drink beer and stuff. Do you feel comfortable around these bikers? Not at first, but then I got to know one guy named Roar, and he gives me candy bars and taught me how to throw an axe. Dr. Fountain Goose stared at me with a weird expression. I couldn't tell what it meant. I see, he said. So Penny, tell me what it was like when you couldn't talk. This was the heart of the matter, but it was also the hardest part to figure out. Well, so this summer he started getting mad when I wasn't calling him Dad. I didn't even realize I wasn't calling him Dad because I wasn't doing it on purpose. But then after he started waiting and watching for it, I couldn't say it at all. Then almost every day he started screaming at me about it. And every day it became harder to say. It became hard to say anything. After about a week, I couldn't talk, I said quietly. Very interesting. It sounds like we have some things here we could work on right away. Why don't you pretend I'm your father and start a conversation with me? I don't think it's going to work, I said. Let's give it a try. I shrugged. Hi, Dad. How's it going, Dad? Good to see you, Dad. Dad, wow, great to be here. There you go, said Dr. Fountain Goose, looking very pleased with himself. No, you don't understand. You're not him, so it's totally different. You're not staring at me with your beady little eyes. Beady little eyes, the doctor said, writing that down. Well, I think you can work through that. I can't work it through, I said, feeling the start of a sob. I tried. My voice was gone. No matter how much I was telling myself to say it, nothing would come out. And this isn't something you regularly do to people? Do? You mean not call them by name? Yeah, that's what I mean. It's never happened with anybody in my life besides him. I see, said the doctor. He scribbled furiously on his pad. Finally, he sat back, tapping his chin. Has your father, how shall I put this? Has he ever done anything you thought inappropriate? Yeah, everything I've been telling you about, I said. Of course, but beyond that, any inappropriate touching? I shook my head. No fondling, caressing, stroking. No, no way. He never touches me. He doesn't hug or anything like that. Anyway, I'm not his type. What do you mean, not his type? Well, my mother is his type, or his new wife, Judy. He thinks I'm dumpy and look like a duck. Do you think you look like a duck and that you're dumpy? Sure, I guess so. Why else would he say it? So you're not happy with your appearance, I take it, Dr. Fountain Goose said. I said, I don't think I'm majorly ugly like a freak at a freak show, or someone people would stare at walking down the street, but I know I'm not pretty like my mother. He always talks about how stunning she was and how she'd walk into a room and everybody would stare, and then he'll say something like, where did you go the day they handed out the looks? I see. Are you jealous of your mother? No, I'm proud of her unless she's freaking out in front of people. I see. Anything else? Well, even at this point, there were so many weird moments to choose from. Okay, well, this summer I had to go wash my hands while he was taking a shower. I think Judy told me to because she wanted me to set the table. And while I was washing my hands, he pulled back the shower curtain. And, well, that's what he did. Did he know you were there? Yeah, for sure. I just knocked and asked if I could come in and wash my hands, and he said yes. So he revealed himself to you. Yeah, and it was worse than just being naked. Worse? He was more than naked? Yeah, I hoped he understood. I'm sorry, but what is more than naked? It was, what was the word? It, the doctor said, sitting forward in his seat. I nodded. He was playing with it? I grimaced. What do you mean? The doctor cleared his throat. He was touching his penis? I shook my head violently. No, but it has to do with that. To do with touching? I shook my head. With his penis, yes. Something to do with his penis, but he wasn't touching it. I nodded. He was washing it? No, the doctor thought. He was looking at it? No. He wasn't looking at it or washing it. Right. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I really want you to finish this novel so I can find out what he was doing. I was trying to figure it out.
I was hoping that would be a little bit of a cliffhanger.
It is. You got it. Oh, that was just so moving. And it was so, I love the character, the girl, just she's mature, but then she's also a child. And I just think you nailed that completely. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you. Yeah, I miss those days too at CQR. So, okay, thank you. Now I'm going to introduce our third reader, and that is Suzanne Clores. And I want to begin this introduction by saying that Suzanne was a co-curator at Sunday Salon Chicago for several years. And so we miss you, Suzanne. But for her bio, Suzanne Clores is a memoirist and a podcast producer. Her book, Memoirs of a Spiritual Outsider, is a personal quest to experience alternative spiritual practices from around the world. And her podcast, The Extraordinary Project, asks questions about our cultural attraction and aversion to extraordinary phenomena and all things mystical. Her work has appeared in Salon, Elle, The Rumpus, and several anthologies, and her essays have aired on Chicago Public Radio, WBEZ, and the podcast Strangers. She's been a resident of the Vermont Studio Center, the Ragdale Foundation, and the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. Her BA is from Columbia University in New York, and her MFA in fiction is from the University of Arizona. She lives in Evanston, Illinois with her family. Suzanne, it's all yours now. Yay.
Such a lovely introduction. Thank you, Natalia. And
So
yeah,
all true.
so I'm misty-eyed when I think about Sunday Salon. Those were really wonderful years, and we will return again and be together in real life.
Yes.
I look forward to that at some point. So tonight I am reading from a new memoir in progress. I was thinking earlier today that I was going to pivot away from this work because this has been what I've been doing most of the time. But of course, the fiction piece I was going to read was too long. I found out like an hour before, which is, you know, the way it goes. So I think that it makes sense that I'm going to read this work that I'm very ambivalent about sharing. And I hope you like it. It's the introduction. And my memoir briefly is related to the Extraordinary Project. If you don't know what that is, it's a podcast about intuitive things. Okay. March is still winter in Lake Forest, Illinois, and the slate roof of the weathered white country estate dripped with icicles. I was on the doorstep the first day of 21, feeling like a nervous guest, although I had had months to prepare. In surrounding silence, birds twittered from their gutter nests. I touched the door handle, unlocked and pulsating with invitation. Come in. I had sought out this residency, my first in over 20 years. I had been ambivalent about writing this book, hesitant to claim the topic of intuition in print, despite being drawn to do so for the extent of my career. When news came that I could come to Ragdale, the 100-year-old artist's retreat nestled on the prairie, I exhaled. No uprooting or traveling across the world with this idea, which had become heavy. I could stay on this side of Lake Michigan even. I was optimistic. Old houses were benevolent and recurring circumstances for me. I had lived and stayed in quite a few. Their weathered wood and well-crafted permanence a comfort, a fortress against time. The good fortune of a beautiful antique-style room for 3 weeks where I would sleep, be supported and fed, made me promise myself to pay attention to all thoughts, feelings, smells, and sights, even those I usually tried to banish. To allow the work to show itself so I could escort it like a sailboat across the water. Maybe, I thought as I stepped inside, this will be easy. A scent of wood, burned and smoldered, carried me up a narrow stairway paved with green floral rug. I was alone in the glorious 5-bedroom house, although no fire was burning. The wallpaper, vined and neutral, depicted wilderness. Invisible trees closed behind me as I ascended. Each step a creak underfoot until outside my room, called top of the stairs, I stopped. A still and silent chaos met me. When I say chaos, I'm not talking about lack of cleanliness or unfortunate interior design. I'm not talking about visible disorder or disorder at all. The upstairs, like the downstairs at Ragdale, was all windows, wood, and artwork, the perfect ambiance of a wealthy, beloved country home. But a trace quality that defied the careful curation hovered, and at the door I was held off by some imperceptible membrane. Sometimes our beliefs only take the form of conscious awareness in the moment of an emergency, triggered by an episode, an occurrence that the body is forced to reconcile. Snaking alongside my rational mind was this one: that any home once inhabited by the living carries the leftover essence of those who no longer walk the earth, like a mist after a night rain. It's an idea that belongs to the discipline of psychogeography, although I wouldn't know this for another year. I have no memory of deciding on this belief or of being told of its truth. In fact, I had done the lifelong work of avoiding haunted houses, horror movies, ghost stories, and other superstitions to stop the involuntary experience I was having right now. Sometimes, for reasons I don't totally understand, I can feel, sometimes hear, and lately see activity behind this membrane. It takes shape like clouds in the sky, composing remnants of a story lived before. My choice to pause seemed ridiculous, even to me. There was not really a membrane. In order to move forward, I temporarily pretended I was someone else, someone who felt nothing. This is just an old house, I thought, stepping onto the jute rug, where the reason for my hesitation became clear. Two people sitting at ease in matching mahogany armchairs. My mind sorted. They might be grandparents. Are they my grandparents? They glimmered in and out of focus. Not simply two old people, but two old women, their age both old and young. One with short hair and a rounded spine stayed seated. The other stood and paced, hands on hips, a well-dressed, friendly force. She was thin and grand and spoke like she was once tall and commanding, but in a genteel way. She wore a white crocheted shawl. She was giving instructions. Her manner was pleasant, expecting to be heard. I couldn't quite hear her words, only her tone of orientation. I listened, wondering if she could see me. In the hair of a moment that I told myself this was not happening, I figured out she was not a relative of mine. She and her companion belonged to the house, or rather the house belonged to them. She gestured with long fingers. If I squinted, I could see a tasteful pearl on a bracelet or a ring. If I strained, I could see her mouth move as she paced. When she finally looked in my direction, I heard her say the words particular and idiosyncrasies. She was saying, for the next month, I should focus on my own particular idiosyncrasies. Denial rolled in, a welcome fog. On the brink of shuttering my eyes against this vision, against this message, against all of it, I heard in my ear like a howling wind, yes, this is the way a book gets written. I put my things down. I unpacked, leaving space around the chairs, positioning my books and reading glasses carefully on the end table as though I was being watched. I was not usually this neat. I switched on the light. In fact, this older woman and her quieter companion were not seated in the mahogany chairs. The room was empty, and yet I could still see their shoes. I have normal vision for a 40-something woman, previously sharp, now slightly failing, in need of glasses when reading or driving in the rain at night. But 20 years ago, my eyesight began to tank prematurely. A life indoors in a dark city, staring at screens will tax anyone's eyesight. When I temporarily moved from New York to the Sonoran Desert, the sunlight and distant horizon shifted something ocular in me. Time outside on long hikes or drives, beneath the mountain faces, under blazing blue skies, forced a healthy refocus. My eyesight sharpened. Tiny text became clear. I could discern the nuanced greens and browns in creosote bark. I could see various hues of sand. When I told city living friends about this vision reversal, most gave polite nods. The suggestion that lifestyle and environment could physically change one's body for the better is not really a New York conversation. But I understand the other reason for the dismissal. The current science did not support my testimony. It was 2002, post 9/11, and the NIH had recently published an extensive study on myopia. Myopia, the abstract concluded, was determined by genetics, more common for the contemplative and well-read, and without a solution to stop the degeneration. I stayed in the desert another 2 years, where my eyesight continued to improve, and conversation about it remained, at least back east, an exaggeration. Fast forward 10 years later in 2012, when multiple articles about reversing myopia pepper the media. Among the strategies, more outdoor activity. Send your children outside, the NIH concluded. Expose the eyes to more hours of sunlight. This proof that 300 days of sunshine per year had earned me a decade of improved eyesight carried a bonus validation. On top of better vision, I had been right about the biology. Forget that my claims had remained an anomalous, kooky anecdote for 10 years, that I had been shamed away from talking about it. Now the science had changed. I consider myself lucky. I am still only occasionally wearing glasses. This is not to say that genetics and luck don't have a say. They absolutely do. But it was the first time that I listened to my own biology and saw an immediate, undeniable result that was later confirmed, that was later verified by science. This other type of vision, the one that revealed the women in the top of the stairs, remains a harder sell, even to myself. It relies on similarly underreported science and rivals our shared preferred materialist belief that when the body dies, so does the mind. The traditional view of consciousness, that the mind is a product of the brain, comes straight out of American high school science class, and most people hold on to it until someone they love dies. At that point, a grief-driven question arises, and it's only human to wonder, to entertain the idea that a spirit can survive, to take comfort in the possibility that, although the animate body is gone, all living cellular material, tissues, and chemical compounds are dead. Maybe, somehow, somewhere, a part of that person remains. So much folklore and religious thought supports this notion. But according to modern materialism, it's just not possible to see or hear or feel the dead. Top of the stairs is empty. Non-local consciousness, however, depends on a fundamental shift in thought. It's a theory that pivots away from the accepted materialist view and towards an upsetting possibility that, to be honest, still makes my mind spiral, like abstract art or experimental jazz. And yet, I am drawn to it like a maddening missing puzzle piece. Non-local consciousness suggests that actually something could be going on in top of the stairs, because while the brain dies, the mind lives. Our minds are not made out of cells or tissues or organic matter, as far as we know. The mind is not an organ. It does not die like an organ. Physicist Dean Radin sees the mind as part of the vast ocean of consciousness, which is not local to the brain. In a small but important tweak of the scientific pyramid, Radin proposes that consciousness underscores all scientific disciplines and categories. It is the building block. Radin is not the only proponent of this idea. Consciousness is fundamental, says Aldous Huxley. Life and death flow into one, says Albert Einstein. In this light, non-local consciousness frames the mind more like an information pool, and the brain more like an antenna. When the antenna dies, the pool remains, dwelling in a shared sphere or a field that is accessible by other living antennae. Physical, emotional, and spiritual information are available. And if the living get good enough reception, that information can come in as feelings, voices, tastes, and sometimes visions. The Shaw family, who resided at Ragdale, perhaps because of their devotion to art, philanthropy, and each other, have left behind an information pool that is detectable by many. I am not the only Ragdale resident who has reported seeing, feeling, or experiencing the influence of ghosts. I completely understand the resistance to this idea, both scientifically and culturally. If I think too much about the mechanics of non-local consciousness, a queasy vertigo runs through me. My physical body doesn't want to know. But after a lifetime of resistance to the sensory details that creep into my awareness from nowhere about people's bodies, their past experiences, their current emotional needs, I've noticed this denial, a total body refusal, has taken its toll on my sense of self. It becomes hard to trust any information that comes in. I waffle instead of claim, avoid instead of engage, doubt instead of know. If you live in a sensitive body, the negation seems worth it at first. A world in which the dead pop up in the lives of the living is kind of a scary place. Who wants to live like that? The art of the shutdown becomes primary. After you stop using prescription drugs to block out your senses, people will say you are hard to get to know, difficult to read. Even your friends will call you deeply subterranean. But as time has marched on, I've noticed after-death communication, whether spontaneous or facilitated with a medium, is a common experience. In grief research, the ADC is a typical component of grief because the bereaved still maintain a living antenna to the information pool of the deceased. That antenna can connect to the departed spirit, and depending on the connection, the bereaved are able to see, feel, sense, or hear. But grief is not necessary. An identifiable deceased person can be seen under the right conditions. All one needs is a very sharp antenna and an acceptance of a certain kind of sight. I am still working on the acceptance. If you struggle like me to imagine this theory in action, lots of metaphors fit. Radio and your favorite oldies station, television and Netflix, your smartphone and 5G. Even when these machines die, the content stream still exists. If you don't accept the theory of non-local consciousness, then you're in the majority. And people like me who discuss the apparitions on top of the stairs prompt another polite nod from people like you. Maybe the following judgments cross your mind. I am an attention seeker, a liar, or charmingly imaginative. Maybe you think I live on the fringe of psychosis. Depending on whom I am with, I might be praised or gently corrected. I might be told I am misinterpreting and wonderfully creative, and maybe in need of a nap or a break to readjust. These are socially acceptable responses. You're extremely sensitive is a common open-ended statement I once found soothing before I understood it as gaslighting. Now I hear the phrase differently. Nothing is actually happening. What's wrong with you? Get some rest and you'll feel better. If I am honest, I will admit the scene I stumbled upon in top of the stairs does not exist in the same way that the chairs and the bed and the desk exist. No one else would be able to confirm what I saw. And yet, the two women were perceivable, like a mist, creating an impression that stopped me, demanded that I take notice and reconcile. I have only recently started to respond to this type of vision, to confront my racing heart. It is never without consequence. It is much easier to ignore. Thank you.
Ah, Ragdale House. I know its good spirit well. Thank you, Suzanne, for this beautiful reading. Somewhere in the past, my 2015 vision is screaming for a comeback, but I know this isn't going to be possible. So thank you again for joining us, and it's good to see you. It's always good to see you, and thanks for joining us. Really wonderful. Our final reader for the evening is Michael Zapata, who was a founding editor of Make magazine, literary magazine, and the author of the novel, The Lost Book of Adana Moreau. I hope I said that correctly. Winner of the 2020 Chicago Review of Books Award for Fiction, finalist for the 2020 Heartland Booksellers Award in Fiction, and a Best Book of the Year for NPR, the AV Club, Los Angeles Public Library, and Bookpage, among others. Michael is a recipient of an Illinois Arts Council grant for fiction and the City of Chicago DCASE Individual Artist Program Award. He is on the core faculty of Story Studio, Chicago, and the MFA faculty of Northwestern University. As a public school educator, he taught literature and writing in high schools, servicing dropout students. Michael currently lives in Chicago with his family. Please welcome Michael Zapata.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming this Sunday night. Thank you, Ignatius. Thank you, Natalia, Patty for reading, Elizabeth for reading. Suzanne, it was such a pleasure to share this space with you tonight on this March or December-like evening, depending. It keeps escalating and fluctuating. So again, thank you. And I also, it's meaningful to have this invite for me tonight. Years and years ago, when I was a younger pup, I hosted with a good friend, Melanie Papadis. We hosted Sunday Salon for 2 or 3 wonderfully messy and fun years. So thank you so much. I hope to join people in person just to have fun when the pandemic, this post-apocalyptic sensation passes through the globe. So thank you, everyone. I thought I'd just read for the opening pages from the Lost Book of Adana Moreau. And you don't need to know anything. So we'll just jump right in. Thank you, everyone. And this opens the first section called the Dominicana. It takes place May 1916. His father was a pirate. He had black skin and was a pirate, and regardless of his occupation, or maybe because of it, he was charming and warm-hearted and loved listening to most anybody who had a story to tell. His mother was a servant to an old Spanish sugar plantation family just outside of San Pedro de Marcor. It was said she had Taino blood in her veins and never lied. She had long coffee-colored hair, and all she had known her entire life was the plantation house where she worked with her mother, the seas of the Antilles, and her parents. On May 16th, 1916, the American Marines landed on the island, and her mother and father were killed in the ensuing guerrilla war waged by the peasant caballeros against the Marines, who, according to her father, were nothing more than tigueritos, hired by greedy American businessmen who wanted to force them off their land to expand the sugar plantations. The night before her parents' death, she had been half asleep, watching an ashy-faced owl perched outside her bedroom window when she heard her parents in the kitchen. She got out of bed. It was nearly midnight. "We should leave now," her mother said. Her father put his finger to his lips, and her mother nodded. "In the morning," her father said. Her mother and father stood in the kitchen and held each other, and she noticed there was blood on her father's pants. She understood then that her mother and father were caballeros. When her mother spotted her over her father's shoulder, she smiled and went to her. Her mother stroked her long coffee-colored hair, just as she had done when she was a child, and told her that the world was the same as it ever was and not to worry. First thing in the morning, the American Marines came to their home. They dragged her parents outside, bound their hands, and made them kneel in the sand. She heard the shots while hiding under their little village house where there were small pools of water and dirt and sand and dirty ashen seashells. Once in a century, her father had told her the sea flooded the land, and for a time neither existed. 2 days later, her family's employers decided to leave for New York City or back to Madrid. She couldn't remember, but the important thing is that they fled to a city where wealthy people had been fleeing to for centuries. The last thing they told her before speeding off in a taxi was that the Antilles were brutal, and she was the last of a brutal race. She thought of her mother, who had worked for the Spanish family for nearly 30 years. She was 16. She didn't want to go home, so she lived alone in the plantation house for 2 months, wandering from room to room, eating what was left in the kitchen, cleaning as she had done before, and sleeping for days at a time on a bed that had once belonged to a queen from the House of Bourbon. One afternoon, she packed her clothes and left the plantation house. She headed west toward Santo Domingo, sometimes walking for long stretches at a time along a coast which was dotted with estates and villages without names, or rather names she had never known, and sometimes riding in the back of a cart driven by a sugar worker who understood without saying so that she was the daughter of murdered caballeros. For 5 weeks, she wandered the streets of Santo Domingo, which were like the streets of a labyrinth, and ate fish and bread scraps at the market. At night, she slept on park benches and dreamed of future civilizations and an endless seabed full of strange, luminescent creatures. At the end of 5 weeks, she met an American in the market who said he was trading with the caballeros and in the American Marines, and she didn't know why, but she told him the story of how the American Marines had killed her parents. He listened without saying a word. When she was done, he said that he was really a pirate. He said that he gave the caballeros a deep discount and sold shoddy equipment to the American Marines at high prices. He was making money hand over fist. He apologized for talking so much, and then he said she was beautiful. He said he had never seen a more beautiful woman in the Caribbean than her. She told him that his Spanish was good, if a little outdated. He said that he also spoke French and some Arabic. The pirate studied her face for a moment and then said he could get her on a ship that would take her to New Orleans. She shook her head. Why not? Asked the pirate. Americans are greedy tigeritos, she said. They're shit. And me? I don't know yet. Maybe you're shit. Maybe you're not shit. Still, she thought about her prospects on that occupied island and decided to leave Santo Domingo. In the ship voyage, she met a boy who looked out of place. He had deep sky black eyes. When she asked the boy where he was from, he said he was from nowhere. So you're an orphan, she said. An orphan, he said, and smiled politely. Like me, she said. Like everybody, she thought. Orphans are all the world really has left. For 4 days, she lived on the deck of the ship and slept near the orphan boy. She listened as he talked about war and mechanical soldiers and an eternal library that he would one day discover and never leave. He's mad, thought the servant girl. He spoke Spanish well enough, but sometimes he sang in a language that she didn't understand. The songs were like a melismatic trance. And one morning in the middle of a song, he stopped singing and told her that ship was entering the eye of the Gulf of Mexico. How do you know where the eye is? She asked the boy, teasing him. Just look, he said and shrugged. The sea was deep, blue, and alien, and as vast as the sky. And she imagined that in the distant future, the end of the world would have its origins there. And for some unknown reason, this put her at ease. When the ship arrived in New Orleans, the pirate was waiting for her. A few days later, he asked for her hand in marriage, and she said yes. On April 7th, 1920, Maxwell Moreau was born in a one-room apartment near the Barrack Street Wharf. His mother labored for 17 hours, and during painful bursts of activity, she squeezed her eyes shut and tried to focus on the smells of coffee and bananas and boiled crawfish and the blows and whistles of faraway ocean liners. This was something she thought that all mothers giving birth in New Orleans probably did. When Maxwell Moreau finally came out, the pirate knew that his son would not be a pirate like him, spending his life on the surface of the sea, a loud and violent sea that swelled with creatures and myths that drove men to early deaths or worse, to asylums. He swore to it and told his wife that their son had ochre eyes, which were the pigment of earth. The baby, Maxwell Moreau, cried, and his mother held him to her breast and whispered son en lumière, which was something her husband had taught her to say in French, and which meant sound and light and was everything the earth wasn't. The Dominicana and her pirate soon bought a house on Melpomene Avenue. Occasionally, the pirate worked for a wealthy Creole smuggler, often for long periods of time at sea or by river and then by marsh in order to help him hide jugs of Cuban rum and the trunks of cypress trees, or guard him as he tried to strike deals with islenos, laughing, or rather pretending to laugh, which was a type of threat, at least according to the pirate, who listened to most anybody with a story to tell, especially an inscrutable isleno. He might as well have pistols for ears and a shotgun for a tongue. He might as well start a gang war, the pirate once told his wife, but he still went, and he still worked for the wealthy Creole smuggler, and she still saw him off and waved as he boarded a motorboat. Sometimes when the wealthy Creole smuggler turned his back to the pirate, he saluted at him in mockery of the United States Navy. Then more often than not, the Dominicana stood and chatted with the wealthy Creole smuggler's wife in the lilting heat and the saunter of the Louisiana sun and watched the trill of fishing boats and egrets drift over the Mississippi River as if they were comets lost in the creation of things. At 3, Maxwell Moreau began to wander. He liked sound and light, and he followed it everywhere, like how the ancient Hebrews followed celestial clues and iconographic fever dreams in the deserts. One day, a hornet entered the house on Melpomene Avenue and stung Maxwell. He didn't cry. In fact, when the hornet flew out the back door and into a garden of sunflowers, Maxwell followed. The hornet flew into another yard and another before landing on a tree. A dog with a half-black muzzle was chained up to the tree, and when it saw Maxwell, it began to bark. Maxwell thought that the dog was even more interesting than the hornet. He walked over to the dog, but stopped just short of the length of the chain. The dog barked, and Maxwell smiled and smiled. He teased the dog, and because Maxwell was canny like Sisyphus, he eventually figured out how to untie the dog without the dog biting him. The dog disappeared for some time, and Maxwell waited. Just before dusk, the dog returned and lay down near the tree. And Maxwell lay down near the dog with his body pressed against the earth. A pulsating earth with heartbeats, which were the dog's heartbeats, and tremors, which were the tremors of the city, and murmurs, which were the subterranean rivers slipping into the lower Mississippi. He then slept in complete peace, and this is how his mother found him. Ages ago, she thought, as she picked up her sleeping son and held him close as she ever had, the world must have been covered with abandoned or lost children lying on the earth. She then imagined in horror that a prehistoric flying creature must have fed on these children. Even though she knew that these kind of creatures must be extinct, she still imagined that one had been circling vulture-like for her child and that she had arrived just in time. She had no idea where this absurd fear came from. When she returned home with her child, she immediately told her husband. He said that her fears were reasonable. He said that there must have been a time when immense and terrible flying creatures fed on children. He said that there might even be a few of the monsters left somewhere in the world, maybe in India or South America. And as Maxwell's tendency to wander increased, his parents grew more and more worried, and they decided to frighten him. They went to the library, and since only the pirate could read, he found a book called Dinosaurs and Flying Reptiles of the Jurassic and Cretaceous Eras. Maxwell sat on his mother's lap while his father read out loud to him and showed him illustrations of pteranodons and pterodactyls and pterosaurs. In hushed tones, they told their son that when he wandered, monstrous creatures with sword-like beaks and black wings took to the sky and searched for him. If they found him, they would surely devour him. When they told Maxwell this, his eyes lit up. He squirmed and laughed, and his parents realized that they had made a terrible mistake. Yet one thing did seem to work. Maxwell's mother noticed that when Maxwell had a book directly in front of him, he was less prone to wandering. She took him back to the library. At the library, she met a librarian named Afra or Annan, depending on who was speaking to her. So for example, visitors to the library or city officials called her Annan, but family members and friends, of whom she had many, called her Afra. Her husband was the only person who called her Afra, which was really the same as Afra, but her husband pronounced the with a lilt that could only be described as the lilt of someone who was deeply in love. She was half Persian and half Haitian, and she made it a point to tell the Dominicana that she lived in the Marigny, which in the 19th century was full of Haitian refugees and which was now full of mixed families, musicians, and writers. Afra spoke of Haiti in the same way other people spoke of violent love affairs. More than a few times, she said that St. Peter would never let her through the gates of heaven on account that she would be incredibly bored there. Heaven would be like a very boring Port-au-Prince, she would say, one without the madness of survival, one without the sea, one without women like her mama, whose curves swelled with the seasons. The Dominicana and Afra quickly became close friends. She called Maxwell a little island mestizo, and she called his mother the kindest Dominicana she had ever met, which was the truth. At first, Afra gave the Dominicana spoken English lessons at the library each Wednesday and Friday afternoon. Later, in addition to the library lessons, Afra would visit the Dominicana each Monday night at her home on Malpenin Avenue. They would eat red beans and rice, and then Afra would read out loud for the Dominicana and her son. Translated into Spanish, she read Persian poetry, Assyrian myths, Greek myths, and African myths. She read the poetry of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz and the fables of José Núñez de Caracas, the Dominican revolutionary. She read Latin American pastorals, modern poetry, indigenous novels, which the librarian all said were simulacrums of Don Quixote. That book, she explained, was the one from which all others were endlessly replicated. So, of course, she also joyfully read Don Quixote for the Dominicana and her son. Translated into English, she read a slim Russian novel called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. She read British plays and American short stories. She read the horrifying and elegant works of Edgar Allan Poe. She also read adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Moby Dick, which the librarian theorized would help the Dominicana make sense out of the American character. The American character, the librarian theorized, was obsessed with movement and tyranny, like a madman, and different from the European character, which was obsessed with systems and order like a lieutenant, and which was also very different from the Latin American character, which was obsessed with the abyss of time, the Aztec labyrinth, and the Minotaur, who wandered both. The madman, the lieutenant, and the Minotaur, the librarian said, constituted the entire history of the New World. In time, by listening to each word and following along with Afra's smiling eyes, the Dominicana learned how to read. I'll stop right there. Thank you. Thank you.
Michael, that was a beautiful and moving reading. Thank you so much. I love the lines. You have a couple of lines that really stuck out for me. Orphans are all the world really has left. I thought that was really beautiful. And how we see egrets as comets lost in the creation of things. I'm sure there are monsters in India as well.
Funny enough, my dad would scare me to eat by telling me that there were monsters where he grew up. He grew up in a small town in Ecuador, and he was I was like, okay, I'm writing about my dad now. So.
Thank you for that. That was great. Well, thank you, Patricia, Elizabeth, Suzanne, and Michael for sharing your truly wonderful work with us tonight. Let's all give them a round of applause, everybody. Before we move to the Q&A, we want to let you know that our next reading will take place on Sunday, April 25th at the same time, meaning 6 o'clock on Zoom, and registration will be required. And we will be featuring Simone Munch, Gina Frangello, Virginia Bell, who I think is here tonight, and Tim Hilligans. So please mark your calendars and check out our website for updates to the